And the sheriff stood with a rope around his neck, and the town cheered. A singer's voice cut through the noise, daring to challenge the most powerful man in Silver Creek. Whispers of forged debts, betrayal, and forbidden love swirled beneath the midday sun. Justice here wasn't blind, it was bought. But what happens when a single woman refuses to stay silent, and a broken lawman finds the strength to rise again? This is a story of gallows and redemption. Would you risk everything for love or watch in silence as the noose tightens? Welcome to WestDreamTales. Today, we bring you a story of betrayal, forbidden love, and a sheriff who faced the noose. If you love gripping Wild West dramas, hit subscribe, give this video a like, and ring the bell so you never miss a tale from the frontier. Now, let's step into Silver Creek, where justice was bought, and one woman's voice dared to change everything. The square of Silver Creek was crowded long before noon. Dust swirled in the hot wind, clinging to faces that waited for a spectacle. At the center stood a rough wooden scaffold, its beams hammered together in haste, its noose swaying like a vulture's shadow. Sheriff Elias Monroe, the man who had once held this town together, was dragged forward in chains. His shirt was torn, his hat gone, his face bruised from the night's beating. The crowd gasped, not in pity, but in hunger, waiting to see the fall of their lawman. The frontier watchmen held him firm. Once sworn to protect the people, they now obeyed another master. Behind their cold eyes lay the golden whiskey of Bartholomew Slater, the man who called himself the savior of Silver Creek. Slater appeared on the balcony of the gambling hall, his white suit gleaming against the dust. His voice boomed as he pointed at Elias. "This man betrayed you. He sold us all to the Mexicans for a pocket of silver." The mob roared, some shouting for blood, others too afraid to speak. Elias stood silent. He did not plead. He did not curse. His gray eyes scanned the crowd, searching, until they landed on a single face. Rosa Delgado was there, pressed between miners and merchants, her hands clenched around the rail, her dark eyes locked with his, and for a moment the noise of the town faded away. Breath caught between them, an invisible thread pulling tighter than the chains on his wrists. It was only a glance, but it spoke louder than any cry. Elias felt the weight of shame, yet in Rosa's gaze there was no doubt, no fear, only fire. He lifted his chin, as if her eyes alone reminded him he was still a man. Slater's men pushed him onto the scaffold. The rope was lowered, rough fibers brushing the back of his neck. The crowd pressed closer, eager to watch justice or vengeance play out in the dust. Rosa's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop this, you're being deceived." Her words rang sharp, carrying above the jeers. Faces turned, sneers curled, and more than one hand reached to silence her. Slater's smile tightened. He gestured to the watchmen, and they shoved Elias toward the trapdoor. The sheriff stumbled, but his eyes never left Rosa's. That silent connection, fragile and dangerous, was stronger than the rope itself. The wind shifted, carrying the stench of whiskey and sweat. Somewhere a baby cried, muffled quickly. The square held its breath as the executioner reached for the lever. Rosa stepped forward, fighting against the crush of bodies. "You fools," she shouted. "Slater owns you. Look at his books, his debts, his lies." The crowd faltered, murmurs rippling like dry grass catching flame. For a heartbeat, doubt flickered in the people's eyes. Elias sensed it, his only chance, but chains bound his hands too tight. He could not move. He could only watch as Slater raised a hand, ordering the lever pulled. The rope tightened. Dust rose in choking clouds. The world seemed to slow. Every sound stretched thin. And in that endless moment, Rosa's scream shattered the silence. If he dies, Silver Creek dies with him. The crowd erupted, torn between fear and fury. Some surged toward the scaffold. Others backed away in panic. Slater cursed, realizing control was slipping. The watchmen gripped their rifles, eyes darting between the mob and their prisoner. Elias stood tall despite the rope's bite. He felt no mercy in the crowd, but he felt Rosa's gaze burning through the dust. That single glance had become a lifeline, one thread against the gallows. The trapdoor creaked. The square trembled with tension. Then came the twist. One of the watchmen, Marcus Doyle, whispered to another with a grin, "When this is done, Slater takes her next, Elias heard it. Rosa was not only fighting for his life, she was already marked for Slater's claim. And in that instant, Elias knew the noose was no longer the only weapon at play. The town of Silver Creek had not always been so restless. A decade earlier, it had been little more than a mining camp carved into the desert, a place where tents gave way to shacks, and shacks to crooked wooden buildings. The promise of silver veins brought men with shovels and women with prayers, each dreaming of fortune in a land that spared no mercy. Elias Monroe arrived in those days, still a young deputy in his 30s. His wife, Margaret, rode beside him, a gentle presence whose laughter carried over the dry winds. They had come chasing work, not glory, and Elias believed law could build a home where greed built only graves. The early years tested that belief. Rustlers raided cattle drives, outlaws robbed supply wagons, and drunken fights left men bleeding in the dust. Elias stood tall through it all, enforcing the badge when bullets alone might have seemed easier. Slowly, his name grew to mean order in Silver Creek, but order is fragile. One night, under the pale glow of lanterns, a gunfight erupted outside the old mercantile. Margaret was caught in the crossfire. She died in Elias's arms before dawn, her blood seeping into the same dust he had sworn to protect. Grief did not crush him, but it changed him. He became harder, colder, a lawman whose eyes no longer softened at children's laughter. Yet people respected him more. He was a man shaped by loss, unbending, untouchable, or so they thought. Years later, Rosa Delgado entered Silver Creek. She came with nothing but a guitar, a worn dress, and a voice that carried sorrow like a hymn. Born across the border in Sonora, she had known hunger and exile. The town welcomed her songs but not her presence, whispering about her bloodline, her accent, her ties to a brother rumored to ride with Mexican rebels. At first, Elias noticed her only in passing. She sang at Santiago's Cantina, a dim-lit saloon on the south end of town, her voice weaving between smoke and spilled whiskey. Men threw coins, some leering, others weeping quietly into their cups. Rosa sang not for them, but as if for herself, each note a wound turned into beauty. The night that changed everything came during a rainstorm, rare and violent. Rosa had been cornered outside the cantina by 3 men drunk on Slater's whiskey. They jeered at her, calling her names, shoving her toward the mud. One raised a hand to strike. Elias was passing by, drawn by the noise. He stepped in without hesitation, his revolver gleaming in the rain. His voice cut through the storm. Back away. The men hesitated, then slunk off, muttering curses under their breath. Rosa collapsed once they left, her body trembling from fear and cold. Elias caught her before she fell into the mud. He carried her to the cantina's porch, where the storm still howled. There, beneath the flickering lantern, she whispered, "Why would you care? They all hate me." Elias did not answer right away. He held her close, the rain soaking both of them. Then, without plan or thought, he pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender and fleeting. "You're not alone," he said. That moment was the beginning of something neither expected. Rosa found herself watching for Elias in the streets, her song softening when he entered the cantina. Elias, hardened by years of grief, caught himself lingering by the saloon longer than duty required. Yet theirs was no simple bond. Silver Creek was not kind to whispers of love across bloodlines. Each glance became a secret, each word a risk. Still, the more the town glared, the more their connection deepened, silent but undeniable. Meanwhile, Bart Slater rose to power. He had arrived with wagons of liquor and a gambler's grin, opening the Desert Star Casino at the heart of town. Silver Creek's miners drank his whiskey, lost their wages at his tables, and signed their farms into his debts. Soon, half the town owed him their land or their lives. Slater hated Elias, for the sheriff was the one man he could not buy. He hated Rosa too, because her songs drew crowds away from his casino. And above all, he hated the quiet bond between them, for it defied the lines he carved with gold and fear. Slater's hatred turned into a plan. He spread whispers that Rosa's brother smuggled rifles across the border, and that Elias covered for her. He bribed men to swear they had seen money change hands. Piece by piece, he built a lie strong enough to topple even the law. One evening, Elias walked into Santiago's cantina. Rosa was singing, her voice trembling as though she already knew the storm ahead. When the song ended, she approached him, eyes wet. "They'll come for you, Sheriff. They'll come for both of us." Elias studied her face, the fear and the fire mingling. He reached out, brushing her cheek with calloused fingers. It was a gentle touch, brief but steady, a promise in silence. For that heartbeat, nothing else existed. But footsteps pounded outside. Marcus Doyle, the deputy Elias had once trusted, entered with a squad of watchmen. His badge gleamed, but his eyes betrayed something colder. "Sheriff Monroe, you're under arrest." Gasps echoed through the cantina. Rosa clutched Elias's arm, but Doyle shoved her aside. He took bribes from Mexican smugglers. "We have the proof," the crowd whispered, fear spreading faster than truth. Elias did not resist as they chained his wrists. He only glanced back at Rosa. In her gaze was the same fire he had seen on that rainy night, unbroken by years of scorn. It was the last thing he saw before they dragged him into the street. The rain had long dried, but the storm had only just begun. The jailhouse of Silver Creek was built from sandstone blocks, its bars blackened with years of desert dust. On most nights it held drunks or petty thieves, but now it held its own lawmen. Elias Monroe sat against the wall, wrists bound in iron, his badge stripped from his chest. Outside, the town murmured like a restless hive. News of his arrest spread faster than fire in dry grass. Some called him a traitor, others whispered disbelief, but all agreed that Silver Creek was no longer steady ground. Bart Slater relished the chaos. From his balcony at the Desert Star, he sent whiskey into the streets and coins into eager hands. The more the people drank, the less they thought. The more they cheered, the more his power grew. Marcus Doyle took command of the watchmen. Once a loyal deputy, he now wore his betrayal like armor. He tightened patrols, posted guards at the jailhouse, and boasted of cleaning Silver Creek from corruption. Behind closed doors, however, he counted Slater's gold with greedy hands. Elias remained silent. He spoke neither of guilt nor innocence, his eyes fixed on the cracks in the stone, remembering the years he had given this town, the blood he had spilled, the love he had lost. Rosa Delgado could not stay silent. She knew Slater's lies were spreading like plague, and she knew time was running short. Her songs were drowned out by the jeers outside her cantina, but her resolve sharpened with every insult. One evening, Rosa slipped through the alleys, clutching a folded paper hidden beneath her shawl. She had overheard Slater's men boasting in drunken voices about debts rewritten, about farms signed away under false terms. She had stolen a ledger page, proof of fraud. The jail was guarded by 2 watchmen. Rosa approached with her head bowed, carrying a basket of food. One of the guards sneered but let her through, eager to mock the singer's pity for her sheriff. She passed without a word, her heart pounding louder than her steps. Inside, Elias lifted his head as she entered. The lamplight caught her face, weary yet unbroken. For a moment, silence filled the cell, broken only by the scrape of chains. Rosa knelt beside the bars and pulling out the folded paper. "I found this," she whispered. "It shows Slater has been forging debts, stealing land. If the town sees it, they'll know." Elias studied the paper but shook his head. "They won't listen. Slater owns the crowd, and Doyle owns the guns." His voice was heavy, like stone rolling downhill. Rosa's hand reached through the bars, brushing his rough knuckles. "Then we fight another way. You cannot give up, Elias." Her touch lingered, tender and defiant. For the first time in days, Elias let himself look into her eyes. They burned with the same fire as the storm-lit night years ago. His chest tightened, not from the chains, but from the fear of losing her too. Their fingers entwined through the cold iron. Breath mingled in the narrow space between. And then, driven by desperation, Elias pulled her close and pressed his lips to hers. It was not gentle. It was raw, urgent, a clash of grief and hope. Rosa's free hand gripped the bars, her body trembling as if the kiss itself carried the weight of survival. The world outside faded the jeers, the guards, the lies. For that fleeting eternity, there was only Rosa and Elias, chained by iron yet bound by something stronger. When they broke apart, Rosa's cheeks were wet, though whether from tears or the kiss, neither could tell. "I will not let them hang you," she vowed. "I swear it." Before Elias could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Rosa slipped the paper back into her shawl. The guards returned, scowling, and ordered her out. She left without protest, but her eyes promised she would return. That night, Silver Creek grew darker. A fire broke out near the stables, blamed on Mexican saboteurs. A miner was found dead, knife in his ribs, and Slater's men claimed Elias had arranged it. Fear gnawed at the town, tightening Slater's grip. Rosa moved carefully, gathering scraps of truth wherever she could. She spoke to farmers who had lost their land, to widows whose husbands drank themselves into debt at the casino. Each story painted the same picture. Slater fed on misery, fattened on despair. But Slater was not blind. He watched Rosa from across crowded rooms, his smile thin as a blade. "You sing too much, señorita," he muttered one night in passing. "Be careful, or you will sing for me alone." The threat followed her into every alley, every song. Yet she did not stop. Her voice, once soft with sorrow, now carried defiance. Each note was a spark in the suffocating dark of Silver Creek. Elias heard her faintly from his cell, each melody drifting through the bars. It reminded him that the town still had a heartbeat, and that Rosa was its pulse. The days bled together. The noose waited. Slater tightened his net, and Elias's fate seemed sealed. But Rosa had one last card to play. She returned to the jail a second time, under moonlight. The guards dozed, their flasks half empty. Rosa slipped inside, clutching not just papers now, but resolve etched deeper than fear. Elias rose when he saw her, surprise breaking through his stoic mask. She pressed a finger to her lips. "I've found more. Letters. Witnesses. Enough to make them question." He shook his head again. "It won't matter. Slater will silence them before dawn." His voice cracked, not from doubt in her, but from certainty of Slater's cruelty. Rosa stepped closer, her face inches from his. "Then let them try. But you will not die alone. If they come for you, they come for me." Elias felt the weight of her words, heavier than any shackle. He wanted to protest, to shield her, but the fire in her eyes silenced him. For the second time, he pulled her into a kiss through the iron. This one was slower, deeper, a vow pressed between lips. Rosa clung to him, her hand against his cheek, their foreheads almost touching through the cold steel. The moment was broken by the rattle of keys. The guards stirred, muttering curses. Rosa withdrew quickly, her shawl hiding the papers once more. She slipped into the night, leaving Elias chained but not defeated. He leaned against the bars, his breath unsteady, his heart unwilling to surrender. Outside, Silver Creek murmured like a wounded beast. Lantern lights spilled from the desert star, shadows stretching long across the walls. Laughter mingled with the slap of cards on wood, a chorus that reeked of whiskey and smoke. In that haze, Rosa edged closer, her ears catching fragments from the back room. A low voice, smooth as venom. The trial, only for the people's eyes. The ending. Glasses clinked together, followed by laughter heavier than any gavel strike. Rosa froze, her fingers clutching the shawl. The next words were half drowned in drink, but sharp enough to chill her blood. "Once he falls, what's mine will finally be mine alone." A card flipped on the table, its face flashing under the lamp ace of spades. Slater's shadow loomed over it, his smile curling like a blade. Rosa turned away, pulse racing, knowing the trial ahead was no search for justice, but the curtain over a sentence already sealed. And in that sentence, she heard more than one name. Morning burned clear over the square. A scaffold threw a knife of shadow across the dust, and bunting drooped from the Desert Star's balcony like tired laurels. They brought Elias Monroe from the jailhouse in irons. The bruise at his eye had gone the yellow of old paper, but his stride was even. Bartholomew Slater stepped out above the crowd in a white suit. He raised both hands and let his voice roll. "Silver Creek," he called. "We will have the truth at last." Marcus Doyle read charges from a folded sheet, the words flat as fence posts: bribery, conspiracy, treason. Every line thudded into the square. People shifted on their boots and watched the noose swing on its hook. There was no judge, only a crate for testimony. Watchmen lined the platform with rifles lowered toward the crowd. A miner swore he had seen money change hands behind the livery. A storekeeper, voice shaking, swore he had heard Spanish in the sheriff's office and taken it for treason. None met Elias's eyes. Rosa came up from the south boardwalk, hat brim low, shawl tight. She walked through elbows until she stood in the rope's shadow. She lifted a bundle tied with twine. Hands steady now. Doyle sneered. No singing. Rosa's voice cut the heat anyway, then let evidence speak. She raised a page. Names showed in the light widows. Ranchers. Field hands, each beside figures rewritten in Slater's hand. She did not shout. She read, and the murmurs tore at the edges of the square. Slater laughed softly. A man indulging a child. Counterfeits, he said, brushing ash into the wind. Two watchmen moved to seize the packet, but hands from the crowd reached faster. Pages lifted and scattered like startled birds. The executioner tested the lever while the noise rose. Elias stood beneath the noose and watched the square shift in small tides. He turned once toward Rosa. The look between them carried farther than any shout. A child cried near the trough. One voice called for calm, another for the lever. Heat and dust and fear thickened until the air itself seemed to strain. Rosa took the lowest stair and raised another page. "Look for yourselves," she said, "or let him hang blind." The lilt in her words sharpened them like glass. Doyle shouldered past a guard and clamped a hand on her arm. "Enough," he hissed. Elias felt the rope glide against his neck and the beam press splinters into his back. He set his jaw. A warning shot cracked from the far side of the square. The bullet cut a lantern rope and spilled oil down the scaffold's post. Smoke licked at fresh wood. The crowd inhaled as one. Rosa jerked free and kept her grip on the packet. Elias shifted his wrists and found a fraction of play in the chain. Not enough to break yet. He edged it against the trap's brace. Slater raised his hands again, the white suit catching light. "This theater ends now," he said, velvet gone from his tone. He turned his head toward Doyle. "Finish it." Doyle grabbed the lever. Elias set his shoulder and twisted the chain hard against the brace. Rosa moved up another step, eyes fixed on him. The square leaned in like a single creature. "Wait." The word came thin but carried. A farmer held up a ledger page with his thumbprint black in the margin. "That's my mark," he said. "Those numbers ain't forged." Slater's smile flickered. A rifleman fired into the air, and the farmer's words jumped and fell apart under the crack. Elias drove the chain into the brace. Once, twice. Iron bit skin. Links thinned a whisper. Rosa reached the platform. Two watchmen moved to block her. She slid past on the edge, quick and clean, breath high in her chest, page still lifted. Doyle hauled on the lever. Nothing dropped. The locking dog had jammed on a swollen bolt. The square froze. Then voices rose like a storm hitting rock. Elias slammed the chain again. Sparks kissed rust, and the join parted with a shriek. His hands came free into a sound that felt like air. Rosa snatched a pistol from a guard's holster and flung it to Elias. The gun slid to his boots. He kicked the noose aside, bent, and rose with the revolver firm in both hands. Slater stepped back, Derringer bleeding from his sleeve like a small snake. "Shoot him," he barked. Rifles swung toward the scaffold, too many eyes on the gun, not on the woman who had thrown it. Rosa drove her shoulder into Doyle and sent him spinning from the lever. He caught himself on a post and came up with his own pistol. For the first time, he aimed at Rosa instead of Elias. Elias moved before the thought finished. His first shot broke Doyle's wrist and sent the pistol skittering. His second snapped a rifleman's hat and swung a line of muzzles off target. The crowd burst into motion. Some ran, some surged. The mission bell clanged as if the rope had remembered how to move. Windows rattled along the street. Slater fired and grazed Elias's shoulder. Heat flashed down his arm. His grip wavered and steadied. He saw Slater edging toward the far rail. "Call them off," Elias said. "Walk down." Slater smiled with every learned tooth. He lowered the Derringer as if to lay it down, then snapped it up for a throat shot. Elias fired first. Slater stumbled into the rail. The Derringer flipped to the planks and slipped through a crack to the dirt below. Everything hung a heartbeat, smoke, dust. Voices, and then the watchman faltered. Rifles dipped. Men chose wages or skin, and scattered any way that wasn't toward Elias Monroe. Rosa stepped to Elias's side on the platform. A streak of ash crossed her cheek, and her hair had come loose. She faced the town. "These accounts are real," she said. "The debt was theft. Read." She let the last pages fall onto the trapdoor. Someone began to read aloud, then another, until the words braided into a rope stronger than the one that had almost taken his breath. Slater pushed off the rail, blood at his side and fury in his eyes. He looked over the square and saw it sliding from him like cards blown off a table. He glanced at Rosa and saw only the ace he could not control. He lunged. Elias stepped once and filled the space between. "It ends here," he said. 4 words like iron. A blade flashed from Slater's sleeve. Elias caught the wrist and twisted until the knife clanged to wood. Slater's breath whistled with something that might have been a laugh. "Do it," Slater hissed. "Prove them right." Elias let go and hit him once. Clean. The way a man ends a fight without a bullet. Slater went to his knees and then to his back, staring up at the noose as if the sky had stopped. Around the square, rifles lowered to boards. The farmer with the thumbprint climbed the steps with others at his heels. He looked from Elias to Rosa, apology and relief wrestling on his face. Elias lowered the revolver. He looked at the rope, then the crowd. "No more," he said. The words were not loud, but they carried. The bell tolled once. Smoke thinned. Dust settled in lazy swirls. Somewhere a horse stamped and shook its mane. Rosa knelt to gather the pages. They were smudged now with ashen hands, but the ink still held. She pressed them to her chest like a book that had found its ending. Slater groaned and rolled to his side. Doyle cradled his ruined wrist and watched the town step gently away from him. No one moved to help either man. Elias felt the burn at his shoulder and the lightness of unshackled wrists. He drew a breath that belonged to him. He turned to Rosa, and their eyes met without a word, the same glance that had held through rain and iron. At the edge of the platform, a thin bookkeeper lingered, hat brim low. He slipped away while the town watched the scaffold, a small leather journal tucked under his coat. Rosa saw the motion the way a singer hears a wrong note. She touched Elias's arm and nodded toward the alley. He understood without speech that some reckonings had learned to walk away. The town's missing pages had just grown legs. The square began to breathe. Men lifted women down from crates. Boys chased rolling apples. Rifles lay like shed skins along the boards. The noose swung gently in the heat, empty and a little ridiculous. Elias faced Silver Creek. "This is your town," he said. "It will be what you make it." They were not promises, only a beginning. Rosa stood beside him, unshaken, as the square slowly remembered how to listen again. The scaffold still stood in the square, its rope swaying gently like a shadow that refused to leave. People drifted in uneasy clusters, voices low, glancing at Elias Monroe as if uncertain whether he was still their sheriff or a ghost who had slipped free of the noose. Rosa Delgado remained at his side, the packet of papers pressed to her chest. Ash streaked her cheek, but her eyes carried no fear now, only a quiet strength. She had faced the gallows as much as Elias had. The watchmen were gone, their rifles abandoned. Slater lay unconscious near the rail, blood soaking his white suit, his empire crumbling with each breath. Doyle sat against a post, his ruined wrist bound in cloth, staring at the dust as though it might swallow him. Elias stood tall and faced the townspeople. His voice was steady, though his shoulder bled. "Silver Creek is yours," he said. "No man's debts should bind it again." His words fell into the silence and seemed to plant there, like seeds in dry ground. The crowd shifted. Some nodded. Others looked away, ashamed. For the first time, the people seemed to see not just the sheriff, but the burden he had carried alone for years. Rosa touched his arm gently, steadying him. The bond between them no longer hid in shadows. The town had seen it, and whether they accepted it or not, it was unbreakable now. A murmur rose near the back of the crowd. The bookkeeper, the thin man with the hat brim low, was gone. Whispers spread he had slipped into the alley with something under his coat. A missing ledger. Proof that not all of Slater's crimes had been revealed. Elias's jaw tightened. He had seen the man leave. The sheriff's fight on the scaffold was done, but Silver Creek's reckoning was not. A town that lost its truth could fall back into chains at any time. He looked at Rosa. Their eyes held the same question: could the town truly stand free if pieces of its soul were still hidden in another man's pocket? The bell tolled noon. Sunlight spilled across the square, washing the blood and dust in hard brightness. People bent to gather the scattered pages Rosa had read aloud, their hands smudged with ink and ash. Elias turned from the scaffold and walked down into the crowd. The people parted slowly, making room without words. Rosa followed close, her shawl pulled tight against the hot wind. They passed Slater's broken figure. For a heartbeat, Elias paused. Slater's eyes fluttered open, a bitter gleam still burning there. His lips moved, the words almost a whisper. "You can't kill the debt. It will outlive us all." Elias said nothing. He moved on. Yet the words clung like burrs in his mind, sharp and stubborn. At the edge of the square, Rosa caught his hand. Her fingers were warm despite the chill that had settled inside him. "The town has seen," she said softly. "That is enough." But Elias shook his head. "Not yet. Truth still runs loose." His gaze turned toward the dark alleys where the bookkeeper had vanished. Rosa's breath caught. "Then we follow it together." The crowd thinned as people returned to their homes, carrying fragments of truth in their hands. The scaffold loomed behind them, empty but not forgotten, its shadow stretching long across the boards. Elias and Rosa walked past the church, past the trough where water rippled with the breeze. The town was quieter now, but not at peace. Change had begun, yet the cost of holding it would be heavy. At the far end of the street, a rider mounted a horse in haste. The thin bookkeeper glanced once over his shoulder, a leather journal tucked under his coat. Then he spurred the animal toward the desert horizon. Rosa gasped. Elias watched in silence, his eyes narrowing. That journal held the debts not yet spoken, the chains not yet broken. The sun hung low enough to throw the rider's shadow across the dust. For an instant it looked like another noose, stretching out behind him. Elias tightened his grip on Rosa's hand. "This isn't over," he said quietly. His voice carried not threat, but promise. Together they stood in the wind, watching the rider disappear into the shimmering heat. The scaffold creaked once behind them, as if to remind the town that freedom was never truly given, it had to be kept. And in that moment, Elias Monroe and Rosa Delgado knew their fight had only begun. That was the tale of Silver Creek, where the gallows stood tall, but love stood taller. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Would you have spoken out or stayed silent? Don't forget to subscribe for more Wild West stories that keep history alive with every heartbeat. Until next time, ride safe and keep your eyes on the horizon.